Alrighty. All right.
All right, looks like we're good.
Welcome, Council, to January 25th, 2021 City Council work session. The first thing we'll do is roll call by name. Councillor Clark. Councillor Clark is present. Councillor Castilla.
Councillor Castilla, present.
Councillor Hutchinson.
Councillor Hutchinson, present.
Councillor Inman.
Councillor Inman, present.
Councillor Medina.
Councillor Medina, present.
Councillor Proccio.
Councillor Proccio is present.
And Mayor Knutsen's present. All right. Next thing is the mayor's report. I don't have anything to report this evening, so we will move on to committee reports. And the first one is the Administration and Finance Committee, and that is Councillor Castilla.
We are tentatively trying to schedule our first meeting, which will be in March. I believe other councilors are waiting to coordinate dates, and that's about all I really have to report right now.
Okay. Did you want to talk about the court dates? Did we want to set those dates?
Yes, sorry about that. Yes, if you received in your packets the court dates, and I thought it would just be a lot easier maybe tonight if we just go around. If we were in the going live, that's how we would do it. We would just pass it around and pick some dates. So I'll let other counselors go first, if that's okay.
All right. Why don't we just go alphabetically, and you can, if you have a date in mind that you would prefer. So to observe court, it's on Wednesday evenings at 7 p.m. and those are all the dates there. So I will just start with Councillor Clark.
Councillor Clark would love to call dibs on April 14th.
Okay. Councillor Hutchinson.
I don't have the dates on my phone right now because I'm at work.
Oh, okay.
But can I get back to you guys on it? Just whatever's left over.
Sure. Councillor Inman.
I'll do, and we're doing one time a year, is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I can do May 12th.
All right. And Councillor Medina.
One quick second here. I can do February. Oh, that's January. Yeah, I'll take the February 10th.
All right. And Councillor Proccio.
Sounds like the first available is probably June now. Is that right? Or did somebody snag that?
I think March 10th is available and June 9th on is available.
Okay, if March 10th is available, I'll go ahead and snag that one.
All right. And Councillor Castilla, did you have one that you had in mind?
Yes, I will go ahead and do June 9th.
Okay. And then I will take September 8th. And then, is that everybody? Yeah. So Councillor Hutchinson, just pick whatever is available. If you could send out a list to all of us with who has which date. And then that way Councillor Hutchinson can pick a date from what's open. And then also, if for some reason you can't make your court date that evening, just try to coordinate with somebody else or pick up an open one later on. This is how we evaluate our judge. So we all need to at least attend at least one court session. When you go to court, you'll get a packet from either Roberta or whoever is there assisting the judge. They'll have the packets ready and you just fill them out while you're there and then turn them back in. So pretty simple. All right, if there's nothing else.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
just, so, did you wanted Counselor Hutchinson to email me with her date?
Yeah, could you send an email out to everybody first, just with everybody's dates on it, so we know, so she knows what's open and what's not open,
Okay, gotcha.
and then she can choose from there.
Alrighty.
Okay. Public Safety Committee.
Okay, so I do not have a report at this time. We have not met. However, we're looking to set up a meeting in February.
All right, very good. Transportation and Public Works.
The Transportation and Public Works Committee proper will be setting a date soon for its meeting, but the subcommittee for the Water Rates Advisory Committee is set to meet this Thursday at 5:30, and that will be a virtual meeting.
All right, very good. The Parks and Tree Advisory Board, guessing they haven't met.
There's no report for them.
Okay. And the Airport Commission?
Yes. Well, we received quite a few updates. So the first update that we received was about the runway reconstruction update. There was a meeting has begun on the design work, and Airport Manager Humble stated that the city should be receiving a FAA AIP grant for 90% and an ODA, Oregon Department of Aviation, core airport core grant as well for 9% of the design work, and the airport would be responsible for 1% of that. And the design would include the new base and pavement, new LED runway lights, new precision approach path indicator, runway end identifier lights on each runway ends. And it sounds like some high-tech equipment there. If you want to know more about it, you're going to have to ask Shelley, because and also working with engineer and potential and new current users to get the FFA approval for a 500-foot extension of the runway, which is pretty important, pretty big for the airport. Where bigger planes could come in, which would be really great for the city of Crestwell. Okay, and then we received a 2020 core grant update, basically the airport was successful on receiving the core grant for the generators. I recall, if you remember the last update, we talked about that a little bit. So it was successful, and it's a $150,000 grant for 3 generators. And one would be for the EOC, the second would be for the electric shack, and the third would be for the main building. And this was a matching grant, and the city will be putting up a little over 16,000, which is really pretty good. And the airport is going to be a really nice facility there. In the event of emergency, it's going to be fully powered and functional. And then we received a 2021 core grant update, and that the 2021 core grants, of the 4 that were applied for, Ms. Humble believes that the city will be awarded the AIP match for the runway construction and the resiliency grant to purchase a Defender XT, which is a little bit of a repeat from last time as well, and which is the sweeper attachment, if they have to move snow and all that stuff. And they're going to get some satellite phones and a Connex container for storing emergency operation equipment or materials. And then the North End development update. It seems that the Airport Manager Humble has applied for an $8,000 grant with Business Oregon to pay for the design work to install a wastewater system to service all tenants if you're not familiar with it, there's really no bathrooms out there. So the city is continuing to work with the interested parties regarding the hangar build on the north end. So the ball is rolling, trying to get that water and the facilities out there for everybody. And then the 21 through 26, the State Capital Improvement Program, Manager Humble is currently working with the engineer, the ODA, and the FFA to update the plan all the way through 2026. Much more projects and updates. And then the STEM update. I know we haven't heard anything about what's going on there due to COVID. Commissioner Mike Anderson, who's also the president of the school board, I believe, he gave us an update on them. Basically, they're just waiting for vaccines, waiting to get the teachers vaccinated. And some students have been taking advantage of some of the online flight training, which the guys kind of changed and got something out there for them. And there's a lot of these kids are really interested in this stuff, so they've got them something. And then this was the kind of the last bit of the tidbit of news. Commissioner Jim Orglosio stated that he would like to start a DART program, which is acronym for Disaster Airlift Response Team. Start a chapter there at the Creswell Airport. It is an organization that utilizes pilots, volunteer pilots. And he gave an example of, like, right now, these guys they're flying PPE into Indian reservations, and they do a lot of good stuff. And they're working right now with Washington and California. And anyway, I believe he's going to attend a Zoom meeting on it and bring us back more information on it. It sounds like a really, really good program there. That it's just trying to get going there. So, and that's about it. So
Very good. Thank you.
a lot of stuff going on out there.
Good to hear. All right. The LCOG did not meet. We'll have our meeting this Thursday, so I don't have anything to report. In Lane Act, I'm not sure if they've met and who can do that report. Is that Councillor Clark?
Yeah, so I believe that they have met. I was unable to attend the meeting, but I'm very excited about meeting with Councillor Inman and Maddie Phillips to get oriented and get it started.
All right, Maddie, do you have anything to add?
I could just add that the Lane Act continues to debate a number of things that are all mostly related to its role in decision-making around investments throughout the state. And I believe that the Lane Act this month previewed a little bit about what funding mechanisms and decision-making processes we'd be discussing over the next calendar year, and continues to highlight ways that we can participate in something called an Area Strategies program. Or an area strategies, basically meant to highlight areas that we feel are important to our success in our transportation future. So that'll be about a 1.5 year long project, and it's just getting started. They've had the first 2 meetings that Councillor Inman participated in.
Very good. All right. We will move on to presentations. Creswell first, and I believe Mr. Carmichael is here with us.
I am. Just got unmuted, and glad to meet with you again and to see the 3 new counselors. Welcome. Creswell First is a private nonprofit organization that was founded in 2016 to serve Creswell residents, to support organizations and programs that help people in Creswell. And in 2017, we started a partnership with the city where Creswell First manages the Community Services Fund that the city has. That fund is funded by state dollars rather than property tax dollars locally. And the city has set aside a certain amount each year. For this current year, they set aside $18,000. And we, in Creswell First, send out announcements to organizations that serve the city, and then when they apply for funds, we look at those applications, score them, talk with the applicants, and make decisions about how best to use the city's money. And so that's the list that I've given you. That's kind of our background. I'm the current president. Maddie Phillips, who was just on the screen briefly, your planner, is the secretary of the organization. And let's see, the vice president is Don Amberg. Sue Liddell from the library, the director of the library, is the treasurer, and Joel Higdon from the school district is on the Creswell First board, along with Tom Surface and Jenny Donnelly. So we have been managing the city dollars, and as I mentioned, go through a process of selecting organizations that we think are the best applicants. I think you all have the list of who we funded this year. Is that true? Okay, almost everybody's nodding yes. I'll just briefly mention those and then answer any questions that you may have about the process, about Creswell First, about those organizations. Excuse me. Creswell Heritage Foundation is restoring the school, the old schoolhouse, and they always have fundraising organizations to help support the restoration. And they said in this year with the COVID restrictions, they can't hold those. So they just asked for money to keep operating. And usually we fund programs that have added a new element or doing something new, but not always, but usually that's the case. But in this case and in this year, just keeping things going for some organizations is what's really needed. Community Food for Creswell, our local food pantry, as you probably saw, they've had almost a 40% increase in people looking for food. Gosh, the application they sent to us showed like 2 blocks of cars in line waiting to pick up food. The Family Resource Center runs out of the school, and the school district keeps track of families that are really in need of financial support so that the kids and the families can function. And so we funded them at $2,500, and that's another organization that, as they identify people that are severely impacted by the COVID situation, we may be increasing that one. We've told them that if they run into families that are really, just lost their job, don't have financial resources, may lose their home, let us know, because we've held some money back for that kind of situation. Family Support Services at Creswell funds programs around the holiday time for families that are in need. And so we've given them their money. They'll be spending it in November and December, so that's a ways off. Family Relief Nursery is a child abuse prevention program. They have a good track record, very strong research track record of preventing child abuse. Instead of kids being taken out of their homes and put in foster care, they're able to stay at home, but the Relief Nursery provides in-home services to them. Although currently they say they can't go in the homes with their staff, so they're meeting on the front porch. They're meeting in places where they can meet and meet with the parents and help them. And last, certainly not least, is Women's Space. There are a number of women in the Creswell area that are in dangerous situations of domestic violence. And both the Relief Nursery and Women's Space are really seeing an increase now because everybody's home, resources are less, and so there's a lot more stress and a lot more opportunity for child abuse to occur and for spousal abuse to occur. So those are the organizations we've chosen. That's where your money is I was going to say headed. It's already there. We've written the checks to them and dispersed the money, and we're just waiting to see what additional requests come out during the course of this year. So in a quick nutshell, that's who we are and how we serve the city. And any comments, any questions?
Yeah, sorry,
Yeah.
I just have one quick one on the women's space.
Yeah.
How has that looked since, I guess, this going on with reports versus reports of abuse versus, what we're actually seeing. Are we seeing any type of that fluctuation matching or?
I haven't looked at the official report like you're talking about police reports and so on that come in of where they
yeah,
call.
correct. Yeah, just
Yeah.
in general. Yeah.
Yeah, they are the police and women's space work together when there is a call to law enforcement. But many of these calls are made by women who they're not filing an official complaint or anything at least at that point. They call women's space and say, I need help, and they describe their situation. They may need to know where they can go for any kind of housing. Typically there are kids involved. They may need to know just, how to get transportation, how to get out of there, where they're gonna go. They gave us a statement of a recent call they had where they said essentially our $2,500 will be spent on one family, just getting them out of there, moving them out of that house, getting them set someplace so they're not living on the street. There are a couple of kids involved. So that kind of happens. That's the typical situation. They don't file an official report. Women's Space may encourage them to do that if the kids have been damaged or the woman's been hurt. But they really want to get them out of there. Typically, they may, the people may stay. They may feel it's so scary to be out on their own. They don't know, they stay in that situation. So then they provide counseling for how do you stay out of and when it's really getting hot, how do you get out temporarily at least?
Okay, yeah, that's perfect. Thanks for answering that. Yeah, it was just a quick question. That's just something, we definitely want to make sure we're active all the time. So thank you very much.
You bet. Thank them. They really do a great job.
All right, does anybody else have any questions or comments? Councillor Clark.
All right, thank you very much. All the people that get help will really thank you too. One of the provisions in the application is that when they receive the money on their website or wherever to give the city acknowledgement. So the city gets recognized as providing that support, and you should, because it's a great thing you do. So thank you.
All right, I think Councillor Clark has a question first.
Sure.
Not so much a question. I just wanted to say thank you so much for coming here and being here and sharing the important work that you're doing for the community and with the community as well. So thank you so much.
You're very welcome. It's a good partnership we have going.
It is. All right, thank you, Steve.
You bet.
Thank you, Steve.
Okay, I think we are up for our training now. If Ross is patiently waiting somewhere out there in the virtual world, there you are, and I will let you take it over.
Okay, very good. Good evening, Council. My name is Ross Williamson, and for those that don't know me, I see a few new faces, so welcome. I am the city attorney for the city of Creswell. I practice in Eugene at a firm called the Local Government Law Group, and my practice is exclusively representing government agencies. So I represent small cities and some fire districts mostly. That's kind of the bread and butter of my practice. We don't do any private work, so we just concentrate on small governments. So when I go to a training for attorneys, it's not a training about trust and estates or personal injury. It's about local government and how cities function. And so that's been my exclusive practice now for, exclusively for at least 15 years or so. And I've been practicing, this is my 20th year of practice. And at my firm, it's not just me. I have, there are 5 other attorneys here, so we all share the load. And so if Creswell staff has a question that I can't handle or don't have the time to handle, I have 5 other folks here in my office that can help me out. So we have the full range of services for the city. And I guess it's been a great relationship for me, and partnering with your staff to get your policies implemented. It's been fun working with Creswell. It's been quite a number of years I've been working with Creswell, and it's been a great job, great client. So it's been fun. So tonight, I'm kind of doing my counselor basics course for you all, especially for the new folks, and then for the folks that have seen this before, it's kind of reaffirming what we've talked about before, and it's always good to hear repetition with some of this stuff. So my basic outline for tonight is I'm going to talk about a little bit about council authority and your counselor roles within the entity that is the city. We're going to talk about ethics, and we're going to talk about public meetings a little bit, and then we're going to have a couple little slides about public records if we still have time. So I will fill up time, so there's no worried about me ending early. But Mayor, if you want to cut me off at any time, just give me the flag. And then at the end of that, if we have time, I can also talk a little bit, provide an update on camping regulations and the litigation that's been surrounding camping and homelessness. There's a handout in your packet, and we can talk about that a little bit. So I have a slideshow, and I'm going to see if I can share it. All right, is that, Mayor, can you see that?
Yep, we see it.
Excellent. All right, so this is my first slide, and it is a very rudimentary slide to just kind of introduce you to your place in the world of government. So the city is just one unit of government, and they all have their own spheres of authority. And so this slide I use sometimes to just tell folks that sometimes the right answer for someone who comes in and says that, you know, the city should do this, the city should do that. Sometimes the answer for you as a council is we can't, or it's not our problem. It's not in our authority. So there are all these overlapping kind of a Venn diagram of authority between the feds and the state and the county and the city. And then in Creswell, you have special districts like the fire district. You all have overlapping and sometimes exclusive authority. So just taking a subject matter for example, think about alcohol regulation. So at the federal level, there are taxes on alcohol. At the state level, there are taxes on alcohol. And at the local level, the county and city are not allowed to put taxes on alcohol, but we are allowed to do some regulation of alcohol, or at least the impacts of alcohol. So at the state level, they have their DUI laws, and at the local level, the city is allowed to adopt some criminal and civil regulation of the impacts of alcohol. Another regulation that we might talk about is about guns. So the different levels of government impacting gun regulation. So obviously at the state and federal level, there are constitutional provisions that control the right to bear arms. And in our state, in Oregon, there are actual criminal laws that criminalize certain behavior with regard to guns and exclude local authority to create additional crimes. So that's an area we would call preemption. So the state has preempted local authority over a lot of the gun regulations. The city has a very small sliver of authority to regulate guns. We can regulate the carrying of loaded weapons within some of our buildings. That's kind of the sphere of influence we have at the city level is pretty small. All right, so next slide is talking about your authority as a city council. And this kind of dovetails onto the last slide. So we look at the different areas of law, and we look at whether you as a city and as a city council have even the legal authority to look at a problem. So we look at your statutes, we look at your charter, we look at state law, we look at federal law, and we decide, is this something the city can even regulate? So that's the first question we ask. The second question, because you are a city council and act as a body, we count up numbers. On a council of 7, are there 4 folks that vote in favor of something to regulate it? So the 2 questions you as an individual city councilor need to ask if you want to propose something for the council is, do we even have the authority to do it? And can I get the numbers? Is there going to be a majority vote in favor of it? And this slide just identifies the obvious correlation to the last slide, that if you act as a body, a city council of 7 members, that means you don't act alone. So an individual city council does not create law on their own. Teamwork is required. There is no inherent individual authority for a city councilor. The mayor has some charter level authority, and the mayor also has some authority created by ordinance or city rules. But generally, an individual city councilor just doesn't have any authority to act on behalf of the city. That authority comes later through policy or a motion or the city charter. So the city as a body can get together and delegate authority to an individual councilor to do something. And it's maybe not a great example, but like what you did tonight, you divided up the authority to go watch your municipal judge. And so each night there's court in session. You'll have one city councilor there taking notes, and that one person will be kind of a representative of the city council there at the meeting, at the court hearing. And to just look specifically, where does this come from? We look at your city charter. The city charter for Creswell is basically the city's constitution. This is the document that the voters approved that gave rise to the city and created all of its authority. So everything with the city starts with the charter. And in your city charter at section 6, the power is vested in the council, except where the charter provides otherwise. And so you will notice that it says in the council, not in councilors, or not in a councilor. So we were talking about the authority being vested in the body that is the 7-person council. And I certainly will take questions. I don't know how I'm going to see if there are questions. Maybe the mayor can see them for me, because my screen is taken up by the slideshow as well.
I'll keep an eye out.
Excellent, thank you, Mayor.
Yeah.
All right, next. So as we talk about the authority a city council has and the lack of authority that an individual city councilor has, we are reminded of potential avenues for liability. And that's kind of brings me into the whole purpose of this training tonight, is to keep you guys out of trouble. So we don't want you getting into any trouble. That's no fun, and we don't want to have to hire lawyers or involve our insurance company. And so kind of the purpose of tonight is to give you some baseline knowledge of how to keep out of trouble, and to help identify those red flags that come up that say, hey, wait a minute, maybe I need to stop and ask staff or ask Ross some questions before I take another step. And the way to keep you out of trouble is to keep you within the sphere of your authority. The city of Creswell has insurance through a company called CIS, City County Insurance Services, CIS, and they provide insurance to the city and those acting on behalf of the city. So you, as a volunteer city councilor, you have insurance through the city through CIS. CIS's coverage is limited, however, to the circumstances when you are acting within the course and scope of your authority. So generally, CIS will not insure a claim against you or the city if you are acting outside of your authority. So we will get to some slides about what that means a little bit later. But basically, what we're talking about tonight is staying within your authority, and that goes part and parcel with making sure that we have coverage for anything that could go wrong. Speaking of examples, here's this next slide to just pinpoint some possibilities for liability. Most of these don't come up very often, but these are avenues where an individual city councilor can get into trouble. And the first one is a statutory provision. It's ORS 294-100, and it's called misexpenditure of funds. And this is where if you, as an individual, cause the city to spend money that you didn't have the authority to spend. My example that I've probably told the folks that have heard this talk before is, say you happen to be at City Hall one evening and staff is having problems with the copy machine. It's obviously smoking, it's not working, and we need to get the council packets out or something. And you decide that it's a great idea that the city should buy a new copy machine. Obviously, city needs a new one. This one's broken. And so you authorize staff to go across the street and buy a copy machine. Well, that wasn't in the budget. You as an individual didn't have the authority to spend that money. And so that is technically a misexpenditure of funds. And so what that statute says is that if a claim is brought against the city, that you as an individual who approved that might be individually liable for that to pay the city back. We don't want that to happen, obviously. So staying inside your authority. We're going to be talking about ethics tonight, and the Oregon Government Ethics Commission has the authority to issue civil penalties of up to $5,000 per claim. So that's an area where if you are acting unethically or acting counter to the ethics rules, then the Government Ethics Commission has the opportunity to fine you, and you would have to pay that out of your own pocket. Elections bring about some options for liability as an individual. If you are using city funds illegally to support your own election, that would be out of your pocketbook, not the city's. We're going to be talking a little bit about public meetings and making sure that we're holding all of our meetings in public and doing our deliberations in public, and making sure we follow staff's suggestions in terms of executive sessions and all of that. If there's a violation of the public meetings law, then there's the opportunity for liability. And if folks remember the case from Lane County about 8 years ago or so now, they were having discussions outside of a public meeting, got sued, and then some individual counselors, county commissioners, were held liable to pay for the plaintiff's attorney's fees. And so they actually had to come up with $20,000 out of their own pocket to pay the plaintiff's attorney's fees. And that was not a bill the county paid. That was something that commissioners had to pay themselves. I think I'll skip over the next two. Obviously, criminal actions. If you're doing something criminal, the city's not going to stand up and take that for you. And if the city gets sued, as long as you're acting within your scope, within the scope of your duties, within your authority, then we've got you covered. We'll hire an attorney for you, and CIS will manage that litigation. But if you're acting outside the scope of your authority, then more often than not, CIS will say, we're not going to cover you. So again, this is another reference to your city charter and how it talks about the word council versus the word councilor. And throughout your city charter, when it talks about governing, it talks about the council. So the city charter vests authority in the council. When it talks about elections, how to become a city councilor, it talks about being a city councilor. So you are campaigning on your own, but once you reach the office of city councilor, you become part of the council, and then you only have authority as part of that council. the next bullet is your council rules and rules of decorum and order. I've been at this business for a while, and it seems to me that it boils down to the golden rule. Treat others how you want to be treated. So within the context of a meeting or interacting with each other, it's okay to disagree. It's okay to vote against someone, but do it respectfully, and hopefully others will do it respectfully to you as well. The other bullet is confidentiality, and that's a key, especially for our new counselors. It's something that I want to point out. Confidentiality is held by the city. So like the authority we're talking about is held by the council as a body. Confidentiality, things that are confidential, like if you're talking with your attorney about some litigation or you're talking about some confidential information that might be in city records, all of that is held by the city as an entity. And I represent the city, and so it's my obligation to do what's best for the city as an entity. And you, as a city councilor, also represent the city. And so you have to maintain confidentiality when required. And it's not within your authority to breach that confidentiality. That would be something that's held by the council as a whole. So an individual doesn't have the authority to breach that confidentiality. So now that we've talked a little bit about your roles, about authority, and now let's talk about some specifics here. These are all areas where you as an individual city councilor might be out in public and making statements that relate to the city or concern the city or even represent the city. And the one thing I want to pull from this slide is that you as an individual wear a lot of different hats. And there are times when it could be confusing to your audience about what hat you're wearing. And so I guess my point of this slide is to make sure your audience understands. So when you are speaking on behalf of the city, if there's been a council motion to delegate you some authority to say something on behalf of the city, or if you're acting under the city council rules or an ordinance and you're out in the public speaking on behalf of the city, this is our new policy. This is what we plan to do as a city council. You're wearing your city council and city councilor hat, and you can identify yourself as a city councilor speaking on behalf of the city. But if you were just at a council meeting and there was a contentious issue and something got passed by a vote of 4-3 and you were on the losing side, the council, those 4 members of the council just adopted a new city policy and you didn't really like it. You as a city councilor represent the city and should be speaking now with those other 4 people. That's now your policy too. And so if you have anything bad to say against that policy, you need to make sure that folks understand you're not wearing your city councilor hat, you're wearing your individual hat. So if you write a letter to the editor, you need to make sure that your audience understands that you're speaking individually, not as a member of the city council. And obviously, if you're campaigning, that's an area where you need to make sure that folks know that you're campaigning and not there as a member of the city council. You're there as an individual running for election. I think those other bullets are self-explanatory and you get the picture. The city council as a whole has a very important role to play in terms of employees, or employee in particular. So your city charter section 33 creates the city manager as the office, as the head CEO of the city. And the city manager, Michelle, is appointed by the city council as a whole. In your council rules in section 9.2 actually pretty nicely and succinctly say, the council sets city policies and goals, period. The staff implements and administers the policies and goals. So that's your charter and your council rules really setting it out for you as a council. It's important for you all to remember that you have a very important role in terms of a supervisory role of the city manager. But the city manager then takes that those policies that you create and implements them. So you have to let the city manager do their job. And you don't get to supervise other staff. You just supervise the city council, city manager. So that goes into our next slide here. Your city manager really is the CEO of the city. The city is a municipal corporation. It's got a lot of assets. It's got a big budget. And so like any other corporate entity, there is someone who's in charge, and that's your city manager. And so your city manager implements the policies that you create as a council, and supervises and hires staff. And you have an important role as the city council to supervise the city manager, make sure the city manager is doing their job well, but you don't have a role in terms of supervising individual staff. And I think under the mayor's leadership, you've taken a great step in that third bullet point in managing, and you even talked about it tonight. As a city council, you appoint the city manager, you appoint the muni court judge, and you appoint your city attorney. And you going to visit court individually and taking minutes and taking notes of what your judge is doing, that helps you as a city council supervise your judge. And then, as most of you know, you will meet with me once a year and evaluate the work that I've been doing. That's one of the reasons why I do my monthly reports, to kind of let the council know what kind of legal work is happening at the city and what kind of work am I doing. And then you can ask me questions about what's going on and supervise my conduct. All right. Switching gears, now we're going to talk about ethics. And for folks that are new at the city, I do want to raise the flag that your statement of economic interest, that is something, if you are new, you will have to fill out for the first time this year. And the statement is due April 15th, just like your taxes. You get to file electronically, but do make sure that you see that email and respond to it and fill out the form electronically. They put out, the Ethics Commission puts out a naughty list of folks who are late, and we don't want to see your name on the naughty list. That's all I will say about that. So my ethics presentation is broken down into 3 rules. So I have my 3 rules to keep you all out of trouble. And these 3 rules are for public officials, all public officials. And obviously you as members of the city council are all public officials under the ethics law. So these 3 rules apply directly to you. But a public official is also anyone who's appointed. So like your budget committee members, it's all employees. So Michelle and Roberta are public officials, and any city volunteers are public officials within the capacity of their volunteer service. And I guess I can take a sip of water. I'm also, for you folks that are new to local government, when we talk about ethics, we talk about the Oregon Government Ethics Commission. That's the state agency that oversees ethics and responds to complaints. So if someone has an ethics complaint about you as a public official, they will file a complaint with the Ethics Commission. And I can say I can report over the last 3 or 4 years, we've been observing some trends in the Ethics Commission. And I guess one of the major trends we've been seeing is they seem to be a lot more investigations. Back in the day, 10 years ago, 12 years ago, it seemed like a lot of cases got dismissed early. Staff would kind of take the initiative and decide that there wasn't merit to certain complaints, and so they would get dismissed. These days, it seems like a lot of cases, a lot of complaints actually get to the commission, and then the commission recommends an investigation. And once you reach that point, you're talking about a little bit more heartache, answering more questions, spending more time with the investigators at the Ethics Commission. I don't think people are being more unethical these days. I just think the Ethics Commission has taken a little firmer grasp of their jurisdiction, so we're seeing more investigations. We're also seeing some, I would say, more expanded investigations. So I've seen several cases recently where there was a complaint about an initial complaint, one wrongdoing. Once the Ethics Commission gets in there and starts looking around, they may see other things and they will add those to the complaint. So they will take their own initiative to kind of increase the breadth of a complaint. That's something we've seen several times recently. With that, we've actually seen more settlements. So we have not seen quite as many cases go to civil judgments and civil penalties, the $5,000 civil penalty. We've seen a lot more settlement agreements between the Ethics Commission and the person who had the complaint filed against them, the public official. And generally those result in what they call letters of education. So if you admit fault, if you fall on the sword in front of the Ethics Commission, they will often be lenient, but you do have to admit fault and sign an order that stipulates that you were at fault. And in exchange, they will be lenient and just say, do better next time. The last thing I want to point out, kind of a trend we've been seeing over the last several years with the ethics complaints, is that CIS, your insurance company, is kind of dialing back the coverage they provide. Under your policy, there is limited coverage. So if you have an ethics complaint filed against you, check in with Michelle, and we'll contact CIS to see if there's coverage. And often there is, but we've found that almost exclusively these days, the coverage they provide is on a reimbursement basis. So if you want an attorney, you're going to have to hire one yourself, and they will only reimburse you after the fact if you were found not guilty. So another reason to follow these 3 simple rules. Rule number 1, don't use your position for personal gain. This rule is the but-for test, and it's basically the rule about avoiding personal expenses. So you shouldn't use your position as a city councilor in order to avoid paying money. So the test is a public official, you, city councilor, cannot use your position as city councilor to get money or avoid losing money for the public official. That's what PO stands for, the public official, or a relative, or a member of your household, if that opportunity would not be available but for your position. So that's a lot of legalese. So what's an example? The example that I like to use is an actual case from several years back. A public works director who is a public official at a large county in Central Oregon. They had a public works yard. It was this big, vast, multiple acres of fenced property where they kept their machines and supplies for the public works department. This particular public works director had an RV that they didn't use during the winter. And so they pulled the RV into the fenced yard and parked it off in the corner and left it there over the winter. The RV didn't get in anyone's way. It didn't cost the county any money to have it there. But the only reason that that RV was inside the fence line instead of outside the fence line is because the public works director was public works director. The public works director had the key to the fence and was able to drive in their RV. That was not available to anyone else in the community. So if you look at the test, the Public Works Director was able to avoid losing money for the Public Works Director individually, but for their position as Public Works Director. So this rule does not include compensation, the big compensation you all get as volunteers. It's mostly for your staff. So obviously Michelle gets paid a salary, and she's only paid a salary because she is city manager. That is not an ethics violation to accept a salary. Thank goodness. For you, the big one is reimbursement. So if you travel for city business, if you go to Eugene for an LCOG meeting, or you go to Salem for a League of Oregon Cities meeting, back when we have, in the future when we will have meetings, and you get reimbursed for mileage, that's okay. Even though the only reason you're getting reimbursed is because you traveled for city business, and because you're a city councilor, it is okay to seek reimbursement. That's not an ethics violation. So you've noticed that these rules apply to the public official and to the relative of a public official. So not only do you have to think about your own conduct and your own interests, but you have to think about your relative's interests. And relative is a statutory term. It's defined in the ethics law, and it's pretty expansive, but not superly expansive. It's so expansive, there are 2 slides on it. But so this is the first one. A relative, people you have to think about in terms of ethics, is your spouse, your children, your brother, your sister. It includes your parents, your in-laws. And then the last bullet is anyone who you have a support obligation for. So people in your household who may not be technically a relative, but if you have a support obligation, like a court order that you have to pay support for this person, or if they're a member of your household, then you have to think about them as well. And this term relative is used throughout the ethics laws. So these 3 rules that we're talking about tonight, whenever you see the word relative, it means this list of folks. All right, have I put everyone to sleep yet? We're all
I
riveted.
don't see anybody sleeping. We're all here.
We're still rocking.
So as you probably know, this is killing me sitting down and doing this. I'm usually standing and walking around and pacing. So I'm doing my best sitting here in front of the camera, but it's hard. So, but I don't know what's worse. In front of the camera or wearing a mask. It's equally as hard if I had to give this presentation wearing a mask. Then you get the sweaty lip and everything. It's just bad. Anyway. All right, rule number 2 for ethics. Gifts are limited to $50 per year per giver. So you as a city councilor need to keep this rule in mind when the folks are trying to pad your pocket. This is a gift. A gift is defined by statute, and it means something of economic value given to the public official or your relative without receiving value back. So it's going to the store and getting the free cup of coffee. Not given to the general public on the same terms. So that's the definition of gift. Something of value given to you without value back, not given to the general public on the same terms. So that last bullet means if you get a coupon, it's okay to use the coupon because everyone gets a coupon. So what is the rule? This is the gift rule. You or your relative cannot ask for or receive or give or even hint at getting or giving gifts over $50 from any single source in 1 year if your source has an interest in your official actions. And for you as a city councilor, that means your vote. So if someone is in front of you seeking you to vote one way or the other on something, and they want to give you something, this rule should come to mind, and you should raise a red flag. You should talk to Michelle, talk to me, and we'll figure it out for you. But this is, someone is in front of you with a land use application, and you're hearing an appeal, or someone is in front of you wanting a contract with the city, and they want to take you out to dinner to talk about it. That's when you pay for your own dinner. Now there are, let's see, 2 slides, I think, of exceptions. Exceptions, I will tell you, are written by the legislature. So that's what how state law is made. And so a lot of these exceptions are written by legislators, and coincidentally, don't really apply to you guys very much. They mostly apply to legislators. So a lot of these exceptions, a campaign contribution is not a gift, to the extent you all raise campaign funds, which I know sometimes you do, but it's not at the same level as at the state. So when your state representative is out fundraising, they will gladly accept more than $50. So these are more exceptions. The incidental food and beverage and entertainment, or food and beverage and entertainment when you're acting in your capacity. We kind of, as city attorneys, my group of colleagues, we kind of call that the bad food exception. So if you are at an official city event, or a League of Oregon Cities event, and they feed you some donuts and some bad coffee, that's not a gift. So the main takeaway for the gift is, now that you're a city councilor, be mindful of folks wanting to give you things. A lot of times it's perfectly harmless, but that should just be in your mind. And if you are good friends with a big developer in town, who may have a lot of things going on at the city, that should raise some flags for you, and you should maybe rethink your weekly breakfast outing, where you split where they may pay the tab one week and you pay the tab the next week. Maybe from now on we're just going to split and each pay our own way, have separate tabs. Rule number 3. Confronting your conflicts of interest. So this is the conflicts of interest rule. And this is the general rule about a conflict of interest. A conflict of interest is any action, decision, or recommendation. And so for you as a city council, that's usually your vote. So basically any vote by you as a public official resulting in a financial benefit or detriment for you or your relative, or a business that you're associated with. So that's the general rule. And notice that third bullet is resulting in a financial benefit or a financial detriment. So if you vote on something that causes you financial harm, that can still be an ethics violation. So you can be bad at being unethical, and still pay a civil penalty. So we have to look at any financial benefit or detriment that's caused by your official action as a city councilor. Now, conflicts of interest are broken up into an actual conflict or a potential conflict, and they're treated differently. An actual conflict is what we call the would. It would happen, the would conflict. So it is a financial benefit that would result from your decision. So it's a financial benefit to you or to someone in your household or to a business, and it is a would. Potential conflict of interest is a could. It could. We don't know, but it could. So if you are taking an action as a city councilor, and you're voting on something, and there is a possibility that it could impact you or someone in your house, that is a potential conflict. We don't know. It's a could. The other actual conflict is a would. It absolutely would impact you. So those are the two different conflicts. And we have to look at, before we had to look at relatives. For conflicts of interest, we have to look at relatives, but we also have to look at businesses with which you are associated. And these two slides are the statutory definition of what that means in the ethics law. Basically, for you all, it's your employer is a business with which you are associated with, or if you own a lot of stock, or if you have a small run family business and you have an ownership interest in that small business, then that is a business with which you are associated with. Basically, wherever you get your income, so again, your job, but if you get income from other businesses, then that is a business with which you are associated with. So you have to be mindful of yourself, your relatives, and the businesses with which you are associated. All right, so what happens if you have a potential conflict or an actual conflict? A could impact you or would impact you? Well, first you have to do is identify it. So you have to state the nature of your conflict at the public meeting, and you have to do it at the beginning of the discussion, and you have to do it on the record, which is easy with Roberta around because she's always recording us. And you have to do it each meeting that the issue is discussed. And if it's an actual conflict, so if it's a would benefit you, absolutely would benefit you financially, then you have to do the same stuff. You have to declare the nature of the conflict. You have to do it before you start discussing it. You have to do it on the record, and you have to do it at the beginning of each meeting, and then you cannot participate. So for a potential conflict, you have to state the conflict, but you can participate. You can continue to deliberate and discuss the issue and vote on it. But if it's an actual conflict, you have to declare, and then you have to shut up. No talking. And there are a couple exceptions to the conflict. So it's not a conflict of interest if you are a member in a class that has been determined by the Ethics Commission to be big enough to not represent a conflict. So for instance, the Ethics Commission has looked at certain things. So you're all water rate payers. So when you adjust water rates, that's a big enough class of folks where it's not a problem. But generally, if it's a new issue, you have to bring it to the commission in order for them to rule whether it's a class or not. So this is actually an exception that's not used very often, except for the big issues like taxes and fees and the annual budget. If you have any questions about if we're doing a road paving project that impacts one street in Creswell, and you happen to live on that street, so you're one of 12 people who will benefit, that's probably not a big enough class, and so you should not participate in that discussion. If it's bigger than that, then we have to bring it to the Ethics Commission and ask them whether it's a big enough class. If any of you are involved with nonprofits, your membership, so if you are on the board of a nonprofit in town and you're making a decision as a city councilor that impacts that nonprofit, as long as you're not being paid, as long as you're a non-paid employee, as long as you're just a member of the board or a volunteer, that's not a conflict of interest.
Ross, I have a question.
Yes, please.
So it includes, we're talking about road improvements for South 2nd Street. The Transportation and Public Works Committee is working on this and financing South 2nd Street. And Manager Amberg and I both live on South 2nd Street. So going forward, how do we even get anything done if we have a direct conflict of interest?
So if at this point you're just making recommendations, so as a committee you're making a recommendation, and Mayor, this is a I didn't set you up, so this is a perfect segue. I mean, so my example is going to talk a little bit about it, but we'll use your example. So you have a committee that is going to be making recommendations to the council. As a committee member, everything is a could. It's never a would, because it's just a recommendation. There's always someone higher than you that's going to be making the final decision. So the recommendation that you make right now is only a potential conflict. So I would recommend at the beginning of each meeting that you're talking about 2nd Street, announce that you live on 2nd Street, and that's a potential conflict of interest. When it comes to you as a city councilor, as the mayor, if that recommendation comes to you, and you may need to declare an actual conflict, and we can talk about that in more detail. But I suspect that may be an actual conflict.
Okay. Like I said, it's probably a year or two down the road before we get to that point, but I just know that that's what the committee is working on now. I'm not on that committee, so I don't have to worry about that right now. But yeah, so when it comes to council, after the committee discusses it and makes a recommendation, then I will have to. Yeah. Does that apply to Manager Amberg as well?
I think she's a staff person on the committee. I don't think she is a member of the committee. So I don't believe there is any obligation for her to declare any potential conflict. And at most it would be a potential conflict because she's not the deciding body right now.
Right. Okay.
And I also want to say, Mayor, not to set you up again, but I mean, that's the exact conversation that this presentation is supposed to elicit. It's supposed to make you think about, oh, I'm making some decisions at the committee level or at the city council level that may impact me. And so I'm raising some red flags. So that's the exact purpose of this presentation. It's not necessarily to answer every question that you might have about ethics, but to make you think about it and put the brakes on some things and get in touch with me or Michelle, and we'll help you through it. So that's exactly right. So that was just a great example. So I won't have to talk too in depth about my example that I have on the slide here. But this is an actual Oregon Government Ethics Commission advisory opinion that they issued back in 2019. It was a question from Springfield about how Springfield was updating their residential land use code. So Springfield had this big process with lots of committees and lots of meetings about how to update their land use code that governed all residential property in the city. I think everyone on the city council and probably everyone on the planning commission owned or rented a house in Springfield. And so these updates impacted everyone. And they had 4 layers of meetings in Springfield. They had this technical advisory committee that was made up of citizens from Springfield, and they made recommendations to something called the Governance Committee, which was made up of 2 city councilors and 2 planning commissioners. And that Governance Committee then made a recommendation to the Planning Commission, who then made a recommendation to the City Council. And what we heard from the Government Ethics Commission is if you were a homeowner in Springfield that would be impacted by these land use code updates, if you were on the Technical Advisory Committee, the Governance Committee, or the Planning Commission, you were only making recommendations, and so it would only be a potential conflict of interest. There couldn't be a would. It was always a could. We don't know for sure what the city council is going to do. They may reject the whole thing and it may go away. So even if you are recommending to the city council that the driveway in front of your house be paved in gold, that is only a potential conflict, because the city council could say, no, we're not paving your driveway in gold. It would never be a wood. But we did have to worry about, Springfield did have to worry about their city councilors, and they had to work through a process. If this comes up, we can work through it together. But it was a pretty complex process of how to solve those actual conflicts for the city councilors. I have 2 quick slides on nepotism, and that is the notion of hiring or supervising someone that is a relative of yours. There is ethics law on this, and we will work through it if this ever comes up. I think as a city council, the main thing for you to know is that this doesn't really apply to you very much, except in the case of appointing like budget committee members. So if you want your spouse to be on the budget committee, that's okay. You just shouldn't vote on it. Councilors don't supervise the budget committee, but they do make appointments to the budget committee. So if you have a spouse or a relative that wants to be on the budget committee, that's okay. We just don't want you to vote on it. How am I at 7:15 now? I'm going to keep going until I get the hook from the mayor. We could talk pretty quickly about public meetings, and then I will talk very quickly about public records. So we're getting close.
Okay.
All right. And the thing to know about public meetings is that you should be making your decisions in public meetings, not in private. And you have a lot of resources. So if you have any questions about whether you're doing something wrong or right with a public meeting, whether you should be having a certain discussion or not, always start with Michelle and Roberta. They are great experts on this, and they can reach out to me if they need help. And then we will look at the Attorney General's Public Meetings Manual, and we'll look at the state law, and we'll figure it out for you. But here is the law on public meetings. And basically the law in public meetings is that you should deliberate, and I've underlined the key terms here. You should deliberate, discuss, and inform yourself about your policy decisions in public. This should all be done out in the open. We want you deliberating about your decisions. We want you making your decisions, and we want you informing yourself about those decisions in public. And when we have a court case about a public meetings violation, this is what the courts are looking at. This is the definition of what it means to have a meeting and what it means to violate the law by meeting in private. So generally the second bullet is the key question for a court. It's whether a quorum of your city council, so whether 4 members of your governing body may not meet in private for the purpose of deciding on or deliberating towards a decision. So again, they want you to be deliberating and deciding out in the open. We don't want you to meet in private. So what does it mean to meet in private? Well, we've had some recent court cases that talk about what it means to meet in private, and it's a little bit broader than you might think. It's broader than just having 4 of you sit down at a cafe and talk about city business. It can also be what is now known as serial discussions or serial meetings. So if you are exchanging emails, so the 4 of you are never in the same room, but you're exchanging emails or texts or even posting on a community Facebook page, and 4 of you are basically having a discussion on the Facebook page. Those series of communications can come together and form a meeting, and that would violate the law. So you need to be careful if you have something on your agenda coming up. Obviously you don't want 4 of you to get together and talk about it. but we don't want 4 of you to be exchanging emails or texts about it either. The one carve out we have are administrative matters. So the courts have actually said it's okay for you to exchange emails about your meeting date. Thank you. So you can actually have a robust discussion about whether Monday works for you or next Monday works better. You can have those types of administrative discussions without violating the law. And so this is the sphere of Roberta here. These are the things that we're concerned about not taking place if you are meeting in private. So these are the requirements of a public meeting. We have to notice the public meeting. It's got to be in a space in a location that's accessible, including our online meetings have to be accessible. We have to record the voting, and we have to have a record of the documents that were discussed. So Roberta's going to have a copy of my PowerPoint presentation for the record, for instance. And all of these things don't take place if you're having a private meeting. And I will skip over, I think, maybe the cases. This is that Lane County case that I was talking about a little bit earlier. Lane County Board of Commissioners was trying to pass a supplemental budget on a controversial topic, and they didn't want to talk about it in public because it was sensitive. And so they had a lot of discussions via email. They had some discussions at a bar. And then when it came time to vote on the supplemental budget, there was a motion, there was a second, and there was a vote, and there was no discussion. And so that raised some flags for the Register Guard, and they decided to investigate. And they found out that commissioners were meeting in private. And so this created this case. And this has actually resulted in a settlement agreement between the county and the plaintiffs. The county agreed to pay the plaintiffs $350,000 in attorney's fees for the plaintiffs. And then 2 commissioners individually had to pay $20,000 each. So this was an extreme case, yes, very extreme case. But that's real money, and we don't want that to happen to anyone, especially here in Creswell. So if you have any questions about public meetings and whether you're doing things properly, what things you can talk to other counselors about, what things you can't, please let us know and we will help you through that. I'm going to skip right over this one. This is stuff we already talked about. These are my practical tips for public meetings. And I will say that these are not rules. This is not black letter law, as we say. These are my ultra conservative tips for you to keep you out of trouble. I recognize that these, you can't adhere to these all the time. But if you have these in your mind, and this is kind of your goal, then you will be very safe. So avoid replying to emails when city business is shared. So if you've got, Roberta sends out the agenda for the meeting, and that is not the time to then reply to the full city council and start talking about an agenda topic. That is unwise and something you shouldn't do. Avoid having conversations in person or via email between counselors where the views of a fellow counselor is shared. So this has to do with the concept of being an intermediary is what it was called in the court case. So one city councilor can talk to Counselor A and then turn around and talk to Counselor B. That's not a quorum. It's 2 individual conversations. But if Counselor A shared their views and then that counselor took those views with them to Counselor B, court says, well, that's basically having 3 people in the same room because that one counselor was the intermediary for that opinion. They basically took that counselor's opinion in their back pocket and walked over to another counselor. So we need to be careful about not only sharing your opinions, which is the third bullet, we cut it off if you don't even share your opinions, but taking someone else's opinion with you to talk to another counselor. Now, again, these are not the black letter laws. These are not the rules. But if you can keep to the standard, then you're going to stay out of trouble. These are my tips, mostly for the mayor. The mayor in her first year, she's had some good mentors over the years. Creswell has had some great mayors, and they've run great meetings. And these are my tips to keep that going. Number one is to have a realistic agenda. Make sure you get the materials out in advance. Roberta does a great job of doing that. I recommend keeping things formal. I think that instills respect and mutual respect, and you've done that already tonight. I think that's great. Another thing to keep in mind is that public participation does not mean a public conversation. So there are certain areas in your agenda where you call upon the public to have their opinions stated. That's great. But once they have their opinions stated, they get to sit down and then you get to deliberate and discuss the issues. Let's not keep going back to the well. Let's not have the audience members stand up and have a conversation back and forth. That makes your job harder. It makes the night go longer. And they've already had their piece. Something you implemented a few years ago was work sessions. Keep that up. Work sessions are a great idea where you as a council can get together and hash out the ideas before you get to a formal meeting. To benefit staff, it's really important to make sure the vote is clear. What's the motion? What are you voting on? Does everyone understand? And the last one is, especially for the new members, it's hard to have these conversations sometimes in public, but you need to be able to do that. That's how deliberations in a public meeting happen. And so as long as everyone is respectful and you're keeping it formal, you can have disagreements. You can vote against each other. You can have differences of opinion, but you really need to have those conversations, and don't shy away from expressing yourself in public. Even if it's a dissenting view, you should be able to have those conversations. All right, last up, 3 quick slides on public records. And basically, a public record is anything that has to do with city business. So by statute, a public record is any writing that contains public business information that is prepared, owned, used, or retained by the public body, regardless of physical form or characteristics. So it is obviously, it's your council packet is a public record. All the documents that Roberta maintains for the city are public records. But if you are doing city business and you are representing the city and you are drafting a letter or you're taking minutes at an LCOG meeting, those are public records. You are creating public records and you need to maintain those and work with Roberta to maintain those. And the reason we need to maintain them is because people have a right to ask for them and they have a right to see them. And our public records law, like our public meetings law, is a sunshine law. It advocates having city business take place out in the open. And so if we have records, generally we have to disclose them. And there are some exemptions and confidentialities, but for the most part, records are disclosable. And Roberta has a very key role to play in that. The city recorder is the records custodian, and the council as representatives of the city have an obligation to cooperate with Roberta when there is a public records request that involves records that you may have. So if she asks for you to search your emails for certain things or provide her copies with things, it's your obligation as a member of the council to work with her to respond to a records request. So that is the end of my presentation.
Thank you, Ross. That was very informative. It's a good reminder every year.
Now I have to figure out how to unshare. There we go.
All right, do you want to just go over briefly what this new ruling means for homelessness?
Yeah, yes.
I mean, it's laid out pretty well in your memo here, but maybe just what that means for us.
Yeah, so I can put it in words pretty quickly. So for those that have been on the council, you've heard me talk about the Martin versus City of Boise case, which was kind of the big earth-shattering case that came out in 2019 that applied the 8th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution to a camping ordinance in the City of Boise. And basically, the court defined, looked at the homelessness situation in Boise and said, if you don't have a place to sleep, you falling asleep on it, you can't stop yourself from falling asleep. So the city can't punish you if they don't offer you somewhere to do that without committing a crime. So if you fall asleep on a bench and that's a crime, but there's nowhere else for you to be, they can't charge you for that. And the Boise case was kind of earth-shattering for a lot of cities, but it was also pretty succinct in that Boise had a very broad camping regulation. It said no camping anywhere on city property at any time. So a lot of folks said, well, maybe this Boise case is limited to those types of ordinances. Well, then we get Grants Pass. So that's the second case in my handout. In the city, right after Boise, the city of Grants Pass got sued in federal district court here in Oregon. And Grants Pass did not have the same type of camping regulation that Boise did. But what the Grants Pass case stands for is that the court will look at the totality of the regulations. So Grants Pass had a camping regulation, they had parks regulations, and then they had policies of enforcement that taken together looked just like Boise. So they had folks in Grants Pass that were unable to find anywhere to go in the city. And if they were unable to find anywhere to go, then the city would issue them tickets. And the court said, that's the same thing as Boise. You can't get out of it just because you don't have the same ordinance that Boise had. So to me, what Grants Pass says is that we need to look at, again, the totality of the regulations that the city has, the policies we have for enforcement, and take that all into consideration and to figure out whether we have a Boise problem or not. And then the last case is just an illustration that this is happening at all levels of court. And this is a city of Portland criminal case. So this is a criminal case that started in Portland. Someone was charged with camping violations, and as a criminal defense to that violation, the person raised the 8th Amendment. And just because of some procedural issues, we don't actually get an opinion from the Court of Appeals about what the 8th Amendment means in Oregon here. But there were certainly some judges that were receptive to it. And I think what this case basically illustrates to me is that the Boise case is turning up in all courts at any time whenever we're talking about homelessness. So it's something that we really need to be careful of. And it's something that your deputies, Lane County Sheriff, they know about it, and they know that we're not currently enforcing our camping regulations right now. And I guess the last thing I will say, yeah, sorry. We have the court cases, we have the Boise cases, but now we also have COVID-19, and we have CDC eviction guidelines. So right now it's just a hot mess in terms of what to do with homelessness. And there are folks that are trying to figure it out. As you may know, Lane County got some pallet shelters. And so they purchased a bunch of pallet shelters. They gave some to Florence and they gave some to Cottage Grove. And so now Cottage Grove and Florence has some of these pallet shelters at a couple sites around town that provide some housing, temporary housing for folks during cold nights. That is just one measure that we're seeing locally to try to combat some of these issues.
All right. Does anybody have any questions or comments for Ross?
Just a quick question on that one. Are we still able to set, from what I was reading in there, it sounds like we're still possibly able to set time frames of no sleeping or restrictions based on time gaps, right?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Yeah, so one thing we will hear from homeless advocates is that Boise is a get out of jail free card for all homeless, that they can camp anywhere they want at any time. That's not what Boise says. And in fact, the court in Boise said that's not what we're saying. There are still tools available. And even in the Grants Pass case, the court specifically allowed the city of Grants Pass to forbid camping at all times in one particular park. So our tool, we still have a toolbox. It's just a smaller toolbox.
All right, Councilor Crocchio.
Hey, Ross. I wanted to ask because it might help me to understand context here. We haven't seen this as an issue in Creswell. I think we've seen pockets of camping pop up, and usually they're asked to move on and to go. In larger cities, though, where you see more of that going on, lots of intersection corners and places where people are camping out, and then people complain, but the city doesn't do anything about that. I'm assuming that the city can't just necessarily do something about that because of this ruling. Is that a fair statement?
That's a pretty fair statement. So again, there are tools that you can use if it becomes a problem. I think what we're seeing maybe in Portland especially, and certainly in Eugene and Salem, are just the sheer numbers that can't be handled.
Right.
So if you have services, then you can enforce camping regulations. But just the numbers have gotten so high that there aren't enough beds in the city of Eugene for everyone who needs one. And so the city is having its hands tied a little bit. But they also are having that policy level discussion about, well, what do we want to do about that? Do we actually want to use some of our tools, or is using some of those tools not appealable to me because I'm a politician? So there are policy level issues going on in some of these cities. And I guess I will also say that it's trickling down. So I mean, it's been a problem in Cottage Grove, and it's a problem. It's popping up more and more in Florence. There's a camp at one property in Florence that they're having some problems with. So it probably is a matter of time when someone decides to set up shop at a park in Creswell.
Yeah, I think that was one of the reasons that I ask every month from Sergeant Denham if he has noticed any changes in our homeless and transient population. But to kind of maybe even get to a point that Mayor Knudsen had made at one time, that at some point we do need to actually start thinking and getting ahead of that issue. and kind of figuring out how we do that. And I remember that we were talking about last year at council that at one point we were going to kind of dive into this issue a little bit more, and I don't think that we did. So what kind of work would we be looking at if we were to pick this up? Would we kind of get into some of the weeds a little bit more of some of this stuff then, or?
Yeah, and in fact, you know, it was on my calendar for March 23rd, which is the date that you canceled your first meeting
Right.
because of COVID, because of the governor's order on March 23rd. So just crazy timing. So I was scheduled to come and talk to you guys about next steps. And that's exactly right. Next steps are looking at those policy issues, looking at our toolbox. So things like things that Joe mentioned, the timing. Do we want to allow camping in certain parks and not in other parks? Do we, and to the extent that we do allow camping, do we want to set a time limit? You can regulate them constructing, like, you know, a big campground, structures and things like that. Boise only stands for the proposition that someone is allowed to sleep. It doesn't stand for the proposition that they're allowed to build a big encampment in your park. So if you can use those tools and you can get those details in your regulations. It's just a matter of you all talking about it and picking the ones that you want to apply.
I think Manager Amber had her hand up.
Thank you, Mayor. I only wanted to add that some of those encampments that you see that large cities cannot get rid of are actually ODOT property. And we had a problem with that here in Cresswell, actually, where we had an ODOT property that had a large encampment on it that actually endangered our airport. And ODOT basically refuses right now to do anything about those camps. We were fortunate in that we were able to point out and show the damage from the fire and show that it was a public health hazard and that these people were not benefiting in any way from the camp where they were at because it was so far away from services that we actually got cooperation from ODOT, but normally they would not run anyone out of those camps. So you got to remember that these rulings only apply to public property, and it would be property that we have control over. Am I correct, Ross?
Absolutely, absolutely, and that's one thing that we've had to educate some of our police about is, you know, you can still take trespass requests from private property owners. So you're not allowed to set up a tent on private property, and sometimes you have to look at where those lot lines are and figure out, okay, where is this tent? Where is this camp? Whose property is it? How do we get in touch with the owner to get them out? Yeah, and I have to say that. Your law enforcement in Cresswell, the deputies that you have, are good at negotiating some of these things away. So I think you are able to solve some of these problems just by proactive policing.
All right, any other questions or comments? All right, I think we're done with you, Ross. Thanks for enduring this long virtual meeting with us.
Thank you so much. Great to see you all.
All right.
Thanks, Rob.
So our next discussion item is resume in-person council meetings, and that's Manager Amberg.
Okay, thank you for letting me back in. And yeah, this was a question that was posed to me by the mayor as to whether or not to start up again in person. I did do a brief survey today of cities that are doing meetings and would share their information with me. And out of 43 meetings, 11 are being held in person, 26 are being held virtually, and 6 are being held in a hybrid fashion. So this is really a discussion for you to have. There would be some logistics that we would need to discuss if you decided to come back in person. I think that it would be beneficial to be back in person, but I think that the timing might not be too good right now. I think that, and I added in the packet the matrix, the risk level guidance chart, and I think in talking to some of these other cities, they are thinking about waiting until it's at a moderate risk level before they come back into personal meetings. And I think I just saw tonight that we did very well. Let me see. Well, we didn't. Well, since Friday, Lane County has reported 159 new cases of COVID. So that's actually pretty good. And there are only 4 people in the intensive care unit. So those numbers are coming down for Lane County, and in a very positive way. Plus, the vaccinations are coming up. So maybe within 2 or 3 more months, we will be in the moderate or medium category, and we can open up. So just some things to think about and to discuss. So that's all I had to say.
Thank you, Manager Amberg. So yeah, I just wanted to get this out there in the beginning of the year with new counselors on, and other counselors, you know, we've all been meeting virtually since March, April. So it's kind of going on a year now, and I just wanted to know your guys' thoughts on, you know, having received all this information, what you would prefer and how would you like to proceed going forward? And if this virtual thing is working, if it's not working. So I just wanted to hear your thoughts on all that.
Well, I think, you know, we'd all want to get back to
Oh, you muted again.
see, darn computer. You know, we all want to obviously get face to face again. That's our main goal. But I don't know with the restrictions that we have to run by doing an actual in-person meeting. I don't think it'd be beneficial to the financial aspect of just things we'd have to put up, the barriers and everything else in the meeting versus waiting a couple more months and just kind of reassessing every 60, 90 days, something like that, or obviously as this progresses. I just don't see the benefit outweighing the restrictions.
Okay. Anybody else? Councillor Clark and then Councillor Crotchy.
I just have a question, really for the counselors who've been part of the council before. Is do we feel like we're getting more or less involvement from our community by having our meetings virtually?
I think we're getting more involvement because they're being streamed online. So people can see them on the YouTube channel and on Facebook. And so it seems like more people are watching than ever attended in-person meetings. I mean, there were numerous meetings and work sessions where we had 0 public in attendance for months on end. So the fact that even 1 to 5 to up to 10 or 15 people are viewing our meetings. So I think we are reaching more people on this platform. If anybody else has anything else to say about that, Councillor Crotchio.
Yeah, actually, that was the reason I raised my hand, is because I wanted to find out what the logistics might be about how we would offer that once we're back in the chambers. I know that we had talked about having Metro TV come in and do a presentation for us, and that happened also right before COVID. So I don't know if we could pick up that conversation or not, but I would feel that it would be highly important for us not to go backwards in that regard. So now that we've kind of let that cat out of the bag, I would not want to do anything that would take that transparency level away. And you're right, you might see that during the meeting, you might only catch 14, 15 people watching, but the replays, we even catch that, many more after the fact too. So I think that the value that we get out of that is huge.
I agree. And that's definitely one of my priorities has mentioned that there's a lot of financial barriers and electronic logistics barriers to broadcasting our meetings in council chambers, but I definitely would like to see that too. I don't want us to go backwards.
We might be
Yeah, we
able
should
to
be able to
find,
simulcast.
yeah. I think there's that broader, like, what's the long-term solution where maybe we do more like, fitting the council chambers with equipment versus short-term solutions where we just take a laptop and we hook up a cheap webcam and aim it at the dais, So we could certainly kind of discuss that as a staged approach or something if we wanted to.
All right, Councillor Hutchinson or Castilla or Inman, do you have any input?
I just agree with a lot what I've just heard. I believe that we would be smart to wait till the numbers go down. The example that we would be leading, it's been, just stay safe. And the hoops, forget the hoops that we'd have to jump through to actually meet in person. And yeah, I totally agree. I think the best thing that came out of this was that we're reaching the public. I think Michelle mentioned a couple times about how many people were watching, and yeah, way better than what we had in person. So
True. Councillor Inman?
Yes, thank you. So I agree too. I think to wait and reevaluate to see where we are at with the risk levels and the logistics of it, but also to that future planning, like Councilor Prochu said, with thinking of the long term and getting it somehow still YouTube, posting Facebook, to keep those viewerships going.
We don't want to deprive the public of our beautiful faces.
Well, or just hearing and being
Yeah, make it
involved,
easy for
yes.
Councillor Hutchinson?
I also agree. I think it's good that we wait, but also keep the virtual open long term so that we get more involvement from the community.
Okay. All right, so I think I kind of feel the same way. Oh, Manager Amber, do you have your hand up?
Yes, I do. The major consideration is not the video part of the presentation, but actually the audio part of the presentation. So that's where the cost is going to be, and it's very difficult to get good audio in a room the size of the council chambers. There's already an echo in there, and I'm just afraid that if we did something very simple to start with, it just wouldn't work because the audio would be so bad. So I'm not opposed to continuing to work on this, but we do have to understand that we're going to have to invest in some audio equipment. The camera is going to be pretty cheap, and you can get a camera and throw it up in the back and get everybody on camera, but the audio has always been our problem, and we'll have to invest some money in that.
Okay.
And is that just getting something to like intertwine with the microphones and everything that we currently have in the chambers?
I wish I could answer yes to that, but our microphone system is so poor.
No problem. Yeah, I just curious.
Yeah, we've had problems with the mics all along, so we need to bring in some people who actually do this kind of thing. We may have to rewire. We've been talking about maybe even needing to rewire the system that's in the council chambers anyway without doing this. So, yeah.
Councillor Prochu?
I was just wondering if we were to engage on a project of that kind of magnitude, if we might also be able to consider some other changes in the council chamber related to lighting and presentation. I know that's budgetary stuff, so all this stuff is probably going to need to be talked about at some point from a budget standpoint, right?
Manager Amber?
I'm sorry. Yes, we would need to talk about that as part of the budget. The lighting is a completely separate issue, and again, when that was created, everything was put in an automated fashion, so nothing is like hardwired in there. Even the lights are individually operated by radio frequencies. So nothing is a cheap fix in there. Nothing is. It's crazy. I wish they had just done it the simple, normal way, because it would make fixing things and realigning things so much easier, so that we could do exactly what makes you more comfortable and is more effective.
All right, so sounds like consensus is we'll keep this on our radar and maybe we'll bring this to another work session discussion in the next 30 to 60 days. Certainly, we're all watching our risk level and we're trying to see that extreme risk go down. And I would feel comfortable if that risk level was lower, meeting in person. But the fact that we're at extreme risk and we've been at extreme risk for so long, doesn't really make sense to put all of us at risk in a tiny little chamber. So Manager Amberg and I will just keep this as a placeholder for a future agenda work session. Sound good? Do you have anything else to add, Michelle?
No, Mayor.
All right, so next meetings, I don't have the next meeting. Oh, yes, I do. No, I don't. Next meeting is February something.
8th.
Thank you. They weren't on my sheet here. February 8th, guys. We'll see you back here virtually. And that concludes the City Council work session. Have a good night.